Marisol walked along the edge of the construction fence, her hood pulled low over her forehead to hide the glowing symbols etched into her skin. She had memorized every inch of the city's skyline by now, each building locked in her mind like a sacred vow. Sodero City was a tapestry of old and new, a place where centuries-old cathedrals cast long shadows next to glossy corporate towers. It was almost midnight, a time when the quiet gave way to intrigue. Behind the flimsy chain link, bulldozers and concrete mixers stood ready to resume tearing down yet another landmark in the morning. She could smell the fresh tang of oil in the air, and it made her stomach twist. It was only the latest attempt by the Orion Development Corporation to flatten a piece of the city's soul. She slipped into a narrow alley, the faint light of a distant street lamp reflecting off the gleam of the runes spiraling down her forearms. At times, the enchanted tattoos felt like living creatures, each rune pulsing with silent intention. Tonight, they churned with an urgency she recognized all too well. They sensed an impending violation against the city's heritage, and her heart responded in kind. In the darkness, the lines on her skin began to faintly glow, revealing arcs and symbols that spoke of an ancient pact between mortal and magic, were the signature of her destiny. Marisol had never asked for them, but she had borne them as a responsibility since the day they first scorched into her flesh. 5 years earlier, she had stumbled on a dusty manuscript at a forgotten library nestled behind the city archives. The book told of primordial runes, old as civilization, that could be awakened when one's cause aligned with preserving history. She thought it a fairy tale until the ink started moving on the page one night, slithering up her arms. Horror and fascination clashed in her mind, but she was powerless to stop it. The runes branded her, each stroke like a hot wire across her skin. By morning, she had discovered that she could manifest thin veils of protective magic with a whisper, or produce illusions strong enough to send grown men running. She used that gift first out of fear, then out of duty, and finally out of conviction, to stand guard over the city's heritage. She crouched beside a carved gargoyle, perched atop an old cathedral that was currently in dispute. From here, she could see the looming side entrance where armed security guards roamed. Once, this building was the crown jewel of a religious order, a structural marvel from centuries ago. But Orion Development, led by its ruthless CEO Gideon Wyatt, sought to replace it with an upscale condominium project. The cathedral's stained glass windows had already been removed for preservation, but were likely sold off to private collectors. The gloom of the night seemed to seethe around the construction zone, as if the city itself bristled at the affront to its history. Marisol focused her breath on the runes, and they lit her face with a pale blue shimmer. She murmured a chant, a half-remembered prayer from that old manuscript. The power awakened within her, surging through her veins. A ghostly gate of runes flickered into being around her arms and torso, an armor of swirling sigils. Below, a guard craned his neck, swearing he'd seen some movement near the cathedral towers. Marisol froze, pressing her back against the gargoyle, invisible behind layers of protective illusion. The guard muttered a curse and turned away. Her mind wandered to the city's countless other landmarks. She had fought to save the old clock tower by the river, scaring off demolition crews with illusions of monstrous beasts. As a child, she had played in the courtyard of the Lunarly Theatre, a majestic place that Orion had tried but failed to buy off. Each time, her runes had guided her to fight, weaving illusions, forging barriers, even tapping into an otherworldly force that enhanced her strength. But Orion was tireless, with endless legal resources and cunning executives. They never truly gave up. Protecting every single threatened site was more than one person could manage. She had a few allies, historians, activists, local journalists, but none knew her secret identity. They offered petitions and demonstrations, but she brought illusions, wards, and silent retributions. She was a rumor, a fable that Orion's employees whispered about. The rune-spun vigilante. She leapt down silently from the cathedral roof, landing behind a row of carved columns. At close range, she could see the date scrawled on a demolition notice pinned to the wood panelling. Tomorrow. Her lips pressed into a line. If Orion succeeded, centuries of artistry would crumble in a matter of hours. She had pinned her hopes on one final strategy, a powerful ritual to bring forth a protective enchantment over the building, making its structure impervious for as long as the runes lingered. Yet the cost of such magic came dear. She would have to tap not only into her own life force, but also the intangible spirit of the city's faith. She was not entirely sure the city's old magic would heed her plea. Slipping inside through a shattered stained glass frame, she lit a small candle stub, careful to shield it from the drifting night breeze. By that flickering light, she studied the intricate patterns on the cathedral walls, religious icons, inscriptions of forgotten languages, and the residue of centuries of prayers gave this space a tranquil aura. She felt the vibrations of times long gone, weddings, funerals, gatherings in which people found shelter in troubled days. Her fingertips traced the grooves in the old stone. Time had worn them smooth, but the carvings still revealed a subtle hum of energy beneath her skin. The runes on her forearms prickled back. Acknowledging a kinship between the building's artistry, she placed the candle in the center of the floor and knelt. Slowly, she peeled back the sleeve of her left arm, revealing a network of swirling lines. The largest rune seemed to wink in the dim light, urging her to begin. Closing her eyes, she spoke softly. "I call upon the memory of this place. Let your walls speak. Let your floors resonate with the faith poured into them across centuries. I offer my strength, my vigilance, to uphold your legacy. Stand with me." Her voice tremored. The air stirred, as though a silent wind had blown through the nave. The faint candlelight began to warp and spread, forming a circle of luminescence around her. Runes began to peel off her skin like luminescent snakes, coiling in the air. She felt their weight leaving her body, a dull ache replacing each mark as it drifted free. The enchantment built itself, layer by layer, thin, translucent veils crossing over the walls, the floor, and the remaining stained glass. She realized the magic was pulling not only from her, but from the deep foundation of the cathedral's spiritual resonance. The synergy was breathtaking. For a moment she felt like a thread weaving through living history. Stone breathed, and runes sang, but as swiftly as it began, she sensed something amiss. Her protective ring of illusions around the cathedral's perimeter rippled. Someone had entered. She had to cut the ritual short, else she might give away her location or risk damaging the fragile barrier. Speaking a final incantation, she snapped the circle closed. The runes glowed over the cathedral in a faint shimmer before blending into the darkness. Her arm felt weak. The largest rune on her forearm faded to a lighter shade. She needed rest, but there was no time. Rising to her feet, she stifled a wave of dizziness. Footfalls echoed at the far end of the cathedral. A flashlight beam jittered across the broken pews, and a harsh voice barged through the gloom. "I know you're here. Show yourself." Gideon Wyatt's stern timbre was unmistakable, all commanding presence. Another body stepped in, a taller figure carrying a sophisticated detection device. Marisol's illusions were powerful, but advanced technology could sniff out anomalies in the electromagnetic field. Ziddy had come prepared. She crouched behind a cracked altar, pressing herself flat. She listened as Gideon's footsteps approached. The man was broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair and unerring confidence. He was orchestrating the city's slow metamorphosis into a playground for the wealthy, flattening history in favor of steel and glass. Rumor had it that he possessed certain underhanded connections as well, rumored alliances with not just local politicians, but entities that operated beyond mundane channels. Ryan's success in seizing property had always seemed unnaturally smooth. The notion had nagged at Marisol for weeks. "I can't see anything," murmured the second figure, fiddling with the scanning device. A flicker of worry broke their voice. The illusions might still be working, though the device intermittently beeped. Beyond the guilt and anger at Gideon's actions, Marisol felt a twist of curiosity. Why was the CO personally overseeing this in the middle of the night? Gideon strode closer, scanning the gloom. "We've had enough of your meddling. You break in, you sabotage, you keep scaring away my crews. This city doesn't belong to you." His voice echoed off the walls. Marisol's pulse hammered in her throat. She needed to escape quietly, or at least misdirect them. Carefully, she tapped the rune on the back of her right hand, a symbol for illusions. The shimmer flooded over her like a protective cloak. She slid along the edge of the aisle, her footsteps muffled by vigilant concentration. Halfway to the door, the scanning device emitted a sharp ping. The second figure whirled around, shining a light in her general direction. "There!" they shouted. Gideon stepped forward with hawk-like intensity. He readied something in his hand silver, mechanical, bristling with an odd, arcane flicker. A pang of real fear slipped into Marisol's chest as her illusions began to shred in the wake of the device's power. In desperation, she flung out a hand, chanting a single word of power. A wave of ghostly force fanned out across the cathedral, toppling a few rotted pews and sending Gideon's scanning partner sprawling. Gideon staggered but kept his grip on the device. Marisol dashed for the exit. She had only moments before the illusions fully dissolved, revealing her real form. As she leaped over the threshold, a flicker of electricity flared at her back and tore through the air, grazing the edge of her cloak. She smothered a cry as energy crackled across her calf. Stumbling, she placed a hand on the nearest wall for support, and the runes on her arms glowed in a frantic dance. She was losing control. She had set the protective enchantment, but it wouldn't hold indefinitely. If Gideon discovered how to break it, the cathedral was doomed. She emerged into the open night, limping away as fast as she could, thoughts swirling in panic. She needed respite, perhaps guidance from the old caretaker of the library where she had first encountered the runes. He might know a way to counter whatever technology Gideon was employing. As sweat beaded on her brow, she forced herself to fade into the labyrinth of alleys and abandoned streets. Cars whooshed past, oblivious to her plight. The city lights blurred, everything taking on a surreal edge under the tension of her magic. If she couldn't stop Gideon soon, there would be nothing left to protect. By the time she reached the library, her right leg burned with each step. The caretaker, an elderly man named Arturo, was seated at a desk under a flickering lamp, lost in a book about local folklore. Startled by her ragged appearance, he helped her to a chair. She rubbed the wounded calf, where the runes had formed a protective layer of scabs. "He knows," she rasped. "Gideon Wyatt used something that cut through my illusions." Arturo's face paled as he offered her a mug of strong tea. He had harbored suspicions about Orion's hidden dealings ever since they tried to seize the library's land and were forced to retreat after Marisol's first intervention. "Something that disrupts your illusions," he echoed. "Must be a mixture of technology and dark magic, perhaps derived from arcane artifacts." He scurried off, returning with a heavy tome whose leather spine was cracked with age. Flipping through the brittle pages, he pointed at a diagram of runic wards, intimately linked to the energy of the land. "We can craft a counter-sigil that negates foreign enchantments, but it requires synergy. Your runes plus an anchor in the city's ley lines." He traced the library's location on an old map. A faint web connected it to the cathedral, the theatre, the river clock tower, nodes of ancient power scattered through Sidaro City. Marisol exhaled, fighting pain and dread. "All I need is to hold them off until the city reclaims its history. If we manage to anchor this cathedral with the counter-sigil, maybe it'll protect other sides." She glanced at the runic diagrams. Her understanding of the runes came instinctively, like a second language, inscribed deep in her subconscious. She could sense that these particular sigils would fortify her illusions, shield the architecture, and repel destructive forces. But forging them would require an enormous amount of energy. She worried about how far she could push herself after the partial ritual she'd already done tonight. Morning came, sunlight spilling pale gold over the streets. In a secluded courtyard, Marisol centered her stance. She and Arturo had worked all night, transcribing the counter-sigil from his tome onto a large strip of linen. Now she practiced weaving the new pattern into her existing runes. Her arms ached with every movement. Sheets of swirling blue energy flickered, forming shapes that mirrored the designs in the book. Arturo watched, awe in his eyes. This was not just a vigilante's quest. It was a mission that bridged the modern city with an ancient vow. The city needed a champion who could commune with its sleeping magic. Before noon, construction crews rolled their machines towards the cathedral site, accompanied by the usual crowd of curious onlookers and a small group of protesters. Marisol blended into the edges of the crowd, wearing inconspicuous clothes to hide her glowing arms. She saw Gideon at the center of the activity, his eyes scanning the watchers for signs of trouble. Nearby, uniformed security men carried that scanning device from the night before. She swallowed her nerves. The roar of bulldozers started up, dust swirling into the air. Marisol's jaw tightened. She could almost hear the cathedral's stone walls pleading for deliverance. She advanced with measured steps, slipping through the throng until she was within a few yards of the site's perimeter. Her heartbeat thundered as she touched the half-concealed linen strips that Arturo had given her. Sliding them off her waist, she spread the cloth in front of her, breathing the incantation that would fuse the newly inscribed spells with her own runes. In a sudden gust of swirling wind, the relic cloth flared bright, its characters fusing into her existing tattoos. Marisol gasped at the surge of power. She stepped forward, letting the illusions ripple around her form. The crowd recoiled as they caught a glimpse of luminous tendrils flickering in the air. A cry went up, but Marisol was already moving, her illusions towering around her like shifting smoke. She resembled a phantom, radiant script dancing across her figure. The scanning device beeped frantically from across the lot. Gideon pivoted, eyes going wide. The bulldozer rumbled toward the cathedral's grand entrance, metal jaws opening. Marisol raised her left arm, chanting. A wedge of pure energy shimmered, slamming against the bulldozer's chassis and bringing it to a grinding halt. The crowd gaped in shocking silence. The runes around Marisol's limbs glowed hotter than ever, forging a barrier around the cathedral. Security rushed her, and she flicked her wrist, conjuring illusions of snarling beasts lunging from the shadow. Yelps and shouts scattered the men, and Gideon's scanning tech whipped around uselessly, detecting illusions everywhere. Anger twisted Gideon's features as he grabbed the device and aimed it directly at Marisol. A beam lanced out, crackling with the same cruel energy that had grazed her in the cathedral. The illusions jittered, partial forms glitching in mid-air. Marisol braced herself, focusing on the new runes Arturo had helped create. She streamed her energy into them. The illusion stabilized, absorbing some of the disruptive beam. She felt the burn in her shoulders, the cost of channeling so much power. Yet she pressed forward, forcing Gideon to retreat. He snarled in frustration, pressing the device's trigger again and again, but each blast weakened as it collided with Marisol's protective cocoon. The startled crowd murmured. Some captured the spectacle on their phones. Others stepped back in fear. Meanwhile, the bulldozer's driver jumped out, clearly rattled. The security team tried to regroup. Indecision flickered in Gideon's glare as he realized that, for once, technology alone might not suffice. He shouted orders into his radio, calling for backup from private contractors. Yet, Marisol sensed that his frustration went deeper. There was a sense of personal betrayal in his eyes, as if the city refusing to yield was an affront to his pride. Fighting a rising wave of exhaustion, Marisol moved closer to him. Runes pulsed along her arms, weaving illusions that manifested swirling fog. After weeks of secrecy, she allowed her face to be seen for a split second. A silent challenge. This place was bigger than them both, older than any corporate ambition. Claws of arcane mists slashed across the device, causing it to spark wildly. Gideon tried to shield it, but the illusions battered him, forcing him to stumble back. The intangible claws shredded the device's casing, and an explosion of sparks sent him reeling to the ground. The crowd roared, some in terror, others in triumph. Marisol turned her gaze to the cathedral. She stretched her arms toward the spires, chanting in a voice that echoed with the city's heartbeat. The barrier she had crafted with the runes shimmered, enveloping the ancient structure in a gentle haze. For a brief, stunning moment, the entire crowd witnessed the cathedral's depiction as it might have looked centuries ago. Pristine windows shining in the sunlight, statues at the entrance unblemished by time. It was a living memory conjured into the present, a potent reminder of everything the city had once cherished. Gideon struggled to his feet. Anger twisted across his face, but he held no weapon now. Sparks flickered uselessly from the remains of his device. Security men hovered, uncertain, as illusions of ghostly guardians lined the cathedral steps. A hush fell upon everyone gathered, as though an unearthly presence watched over the once-abandoned site. Marisol's chest heaved with exhausted breaths. The runes on her skin felt hot as coals, draining her remaining strength. She stood tall anyway, pinned in the center of the confrontation. Something in Gideon's compelled expression faltered. He reached out to protest, but words failed him. The illusions, the echoes of faith within those walls, and the watchful eyes of half the city left him powerless to utter another threat. A woman from the crowd, an elderly parishioner who used to attend services in the cathedral long ago, stepped forward. With trembling hands, she picked up a chunk of fallen stone. Shaking her head in sorrow, her voice broke. Enough. Others murmured similar sentiments, a swelling tide of opposition. In the face of this intangible force and the runes that refused to let history die, Gideon had no clear path to victory. An hour later, when city officials finally intervened, they found a crowd still in awe of what had befallen. Reports circulated that Orion's demolition team had been halted by some miraculous happenstance. Some claimed they saw a supernatural being. Others said it was a trick of stage lights, a group of activists who used advanced tech to throw illusions. Gideon Wyatt, however, offered no comment, his pride tarnished by the fiasco. Legal wrangles would continue, but for now the cathedral's fate was left in provisional stasis. Preservationists cheered the turn of events, pledging a renewed effort to get the site a protective designation. Marisol slipped away before the city's news crews arrived. She staggered down a quiet avenue, her hoodie pulled up to conceal the dying glow of the runes. She let her lungs fill with relief. It wasn't a permanent victory, but it was a powerful statement. She had prevented Orion's final strike on the cathedral, forcing the corporation to step more cautiously. Rumor would spread about the vigilante who battled with illusions and wards, the one who conjured the city's ancestral might to defend its heritage. When she returned to the old library that evening, Arturo was waiting, relief etched onto his weathered features. She sank into a chair, fatigue flooding every muscle. Arturo placed a cup of tea in front of her, his hand lingering as a gesture of comfort. No words were needed. Together, they gazed at the library's tall shelves, pondering the future. There were other landmarks that would need protection. There were more runes to learn, old places to awaken, and a city that required guardianship from those who saw beyond profit margins. In the slow hush of the library, the runes on Marisol's skin flickered one last time before gently dimming. She felt their warmth, the ancient magic that had chosen her as its vessel. She closed her eyes, letting herself drift. The city outside was not yet secure, but for a moment she could rest, knowing that its spirit had triumphed this day. The quiet hum of history surrounded her like a lullaby, and the promise of tomorrow, of new battles, new illusions, and perhaps new alliances, hung in the air. She would be ready. The runes might have burned her skin, but they also ignited her purpose, and tonight that purpose shone brighter than any neon skyline.